this, but I want to make sure.
I
Sarah,
nodded.
okay, good. We are going to have to manually save the Q&A and the chat, so I'm in charge of that. Whoever opens the room, just for from now on, don't leave until, because it'll close out the whole room. But yes, thank you.
No problem.
And I tricked Sarah into being the person. So Sarah, you can't leave. Sorry.
No worries. All right, welcome everyone. We'll give it maybe a few more seconds to let folks come into the room. All right, we have a very tight session and surely many questions from the audience, so I do want to get started on time. My name is Sarah Young. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a social sciences librarian and director of the Evidence Synthesis Program at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome to everyone. This is our second session of the conference, second presentation session. I'm very excited to hear a bunch of great talks this afternoon. Or morning or evening, wherever you are. So we have 3 5-minute presentations and 2 15-minute presentations in this session with about 10 minutes of Q&A for the final presentation. After the final presentation, a few reminders, please do enter your questions into the Q&A feature of Zoom. Feel free to interact in chat and to share things in chat and to directly address the host and panelists in chat if you have technical questions. Jackson Hoke will be monitoring that in this session. But any questions for the presenters, please do put those in Q&A. And please remember to note in your question who your question is directed at, especially since we have quite a few presenters in this session. And presenters possibly are going to be sharing slides and other resources in this session. You'll find those at the resources link at the bottom of your Zoom window. And then lastly, I just want to remind you of our code of conduct. You'll find that here, along with a link to report any violations of the code of conduct that we can address outside of the session. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, Elizabeth Yates and Kimberly Ash, presenting on Sowing the Seeds of Success, how a work plan can help librarians support researchers doing systematic reviews and scoping reviews.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're excited to share a presentation with you about our work plan. I'm Kimberly Ash, a teaching and learning librarian at Brock University in Ontario, Canada, and I'm a member of our library's Evidence Synthesis Working Group.
Thanks, Kim. I'm excited to be with everyone today too. Elizabeth Yates, Research and Scholarly Communication Librarian at Brock and Chair of the library's Evidence Synthesis Working Group.
So if you'd like to see our work plan while we're presenting, you're welcome to use the QR code or link we've provided on screen, and I'll also share that link in the chat for you. Essentially, our work plan is a structured document with specific questions and prompts that guide researchers or research teams through some major steps of the evidence synthesis process. Along with the set questions, we also include examples of completed work plans and links to videos and other resources that provide further context and support for answering each question beyond what they get in our consultations with them as well. The key elements of our work plan may look familiar to you as they follow the major evidence synthesis steps. And we ask researchers to identify their topic and research questions, gather keywords and subject headings from identified target articles as they start to build their search strings, and outline their inclusion and exclusion criteria. The final step in the work plan is for librarians to identify where the searches will take place. And this is based, of course, on the information that's filled in by the research team in the other sections of the work plan. There are a few reasons we wanted to create a work plan. We initially wanted a tool to help researchers keep all of their planning work that they're doing organized, but we also wanted a way to assist us in structuring the information gathering that we do in our consultations. Because of the structured nature of the work plan, we also use it as a training tool for new researchers and also librarians who are newer to evidence synthesis and are starting to provide consultations on their own.
So we've been using, or rather I've been using, a modified version of this for several years. Even before I started doing evidence synthesis support, it was very helpful to have a structured document when working with grad students, because often you see them more than once and you want to refer to something with standardized information. So it's gone through a lot of different iterations. One of them, or some of the content, is originally from a document from the University of Ottawa Health Sciences Library, so a shout out to them. And then we've incorporated tools that other folks have shared to add to our document. And so a shout out to the toolkit from Zara Premji and Alex Hayden. That's very helpful. We've included some content from their search strategy development. That's really helpful. And our document is open access and licensed with Creative Commons for you to make your own adaptations to be as helpful as it can be. Next slide, please. So we use our work plan in our consultations at both the level of sort of supporting faculty and grad students and at the collaboration level. Usually our first meeting with people is more of an overview of the process, and then we will send them away to complete the first 2 pages so that we can find out more about what their research question is, ask them to identify some target articles and so forth. And then it becomes a kind of a guiding document that we use backing and forthing with them, particularly around development of the search strategy, but also inclusion and exclusion criteria as well. And a lot of the content that they and we are using to populate this document can very nicely feed into development of an evidence synthesis protocol as well. Next slide. So this is a living document. We're constantly making revisions to it, adding different content, etc. I would like to come up with a format that involves less scrolling. We do use headings, so that can help you navigate through it, but it is fairly long. And I'd like to think of a format that doesn't involve so much scrolling. We do have accessibility features, but we need to make sure that we've enhanced them and to make it as accessible as possible for screen readers. And while we have collected some anecdotal feedback from users who do find it very helpful, we would like to do so in a more systematic way to find out what they like, what they don't like, are there things that we could enhance and improve the document. Next slide. I think that's it. So we would love to talk with you further about this. So please do reach out with questions, and I will put our slides in the chat as well. Sorry, I didn't think about it earlier. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Great timing. Let's move on to our next presenter, Jane June, who will be presenting on a scan of institutional knowledge synthesis services.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Welcome to my lightning talk. My name is Jane Jen. I'm the Southern Medical Program Librarian at UBC Okanagan, which is located on the unceded, ancestral, and stolen lands of the Syilx Okanagan people. So in this 5 minutes, I'll briefly summarize what I can of an environmental scan of Association of Research Libraries, member institutions, and U15 Canadian Research Universities that was conducted by librarians, one of which was myself, that are part of a planning team for knowledge synthesis services, or should I say collaborations, at our university. So it's important for me to note at this point that the template we used for our environmental scan, pictured in this slide, was based on a UBC Research Commons template, so due credit goes to them. In our adapted structure, one column was answering the question, is there a knowledge synthesis or KS service? And then other columns include resources defined by having a KS librarian or a dedicated staff, services, which was defined by whether the institution provided workshops, consultations, partnerships, or co-authorship, and tiered services, space and technology, defined by the technology and software provided, audience, which was identified as undergraduate, graduate, faculty, or multidisciplinary, fee-based if the institution had a fee-based model, And finally, a note section for noting any important links, interesting details, or questions we had about the service. So to summarize or synthesize what we found out about other institutions, we took a look at 36 universities to find out information such as how many have the formal service, what kind of services were provided, and to what degree of service, as you saw in the previous slide. And what may not come as a surprise, of course, is that we found most institutions either explicitly or implicitly run KS services in some form, but often do not have a dedicated KS librarian, rather often including librarians in health sciences affiliated liaison roles. And these services often had 2 tiers, of which one tier was a form of a consulting role, usually referred to as advisory. And we highlighted a few key things in our report from specific institutions such as the University of Ottawa, which had a dedicated and detailed page about their formal service. We also noted that while most support services often had 2 levels of tiered service, there were a few exceptions, such as the University of Waterloo, which had 3. However, it's important for me to note here that Waterloo does not have a SR service, but rather a support webpage with 3 categories of support. And similarly, one other institution, which we interpreted to have 3 tiers of support, indicated in the form of advisory, consultation, and collaboration. And in addition, a few of these institutions had delayed or halted services at the time of this scan due to limited or absent librarian availability. We found that the University of Washington and Dalhousie University were the institutions with fee-based service models. And in regards to technology, we found 78% of institutions were found to subscribe to Confidence, which you all probably know is a systematic reviews tool to assist with screening and data extraction. And other software identified from perusing these institutional sites include Rayon, which is free, and a few fee-based programs like Distiller, JBI Summary, and Epi Reviewer. And overall, most institutions direct users to relevant software, but some details may have been left out, such as if the library provides additional support or training on any of the recommended tools. And finally, all institutions with services supported faculty and graduate students. So I tried to summarize it as quickly as I could. It was just one aspect of our service planning team's efforts, and I'd like to thank the members of that team and you, the audience, for listening. And I believe we're leaving questions until the end. So thanks very much.
Great, thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, keep those questions coming in the Q&A. In the meantime, we will move on to our 3rd presenter, Joyce Martin, who will be presenting Assess, Clarify, and Educate prior to starting service development.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Joyce Martin, and I am the Social Sciences Division Head at Arizona State University. We have basically, this morning, I want to look at 3 main steps that our division took prior to starting our evidence synthesis service. So Arizona State University, we are a large public R1 university. We have approximately 80,000 in-person students and 70,000 online students. The steps that we took prior to even beginning us to think of a service are to, number 1, assess the need. Number 2, clarify any existing services and administrative support, and also look for education for our team. So assessment. We assessed in 2 ways. So first, we used anecdotal evidence based on faculty reaching out to our social sciences team or requests for support with a systematic review coming in through our Ask a Librarian service. Secondly, our psychology librarian, Shannon Plummer, examined a number of systematic reviews published in the primary article databases for psychology, business, and education, And in all three disciplines, the numbers of systematic reviews published was trending in an upward direction, which you can see in this graph that Shannon created. The upward trend shown in this line graph is particularly dramatic for psychology. And so these findings really spurred us on to move forward with more serious discussions of how we can best support faculty and grant teams that are using this methodology. Second is clarify. So we needed to clarify what, if any, evidence synthesis services are currently being offered in our library. In our case in particular, we needed to make sure we understood how the health sciences librarians at ASU Library were handling requests, what level of service they were providing, and how they were speaking about their service with faculty and students. Our health sciences librarians are in general more experienced with systematic reviews than our social sciences librarians, but the methodology and goals of evidence synthesis can be slightly different in the social sciences. So we wanted to not be quite so reliant on our health sciences librarians when we received a request for assistance with an evidence synthesis project. We also needed to clarify what level of service was supported by our library administration. So we have a small number of librarians and a very large number of faculty and students at ASU. So time and scale are always an issue when considering starting a new service. And it was important for us to clarify all of this before we began. And lastly, education. So we needed to seek out professional development so we as a team would be able to properly even begin to stand up a service like this. So we have had 4 team members attend the Evidence Synthesis Institute that was talked about this morning by our keynote presenter. And we had our education librarian, our psychology librarian, our business librarian, and myself as the division head attend ESI. In the meantime, our education librarian retired. So now we have 3 out of 6 of our social science division team members have attended the Evidence Synthesis Institute, and 1 team member has attended an alternative formal training course. So we do have 4 out of 6 team members with formal training. And so as you can see, these steps that we've taken, they're not really linear steps. They're things that have happened in sort of cyclical, wavy lines is how I describe it. We've trained, then we've had to start over with training due to some retirements, and these steps are kind of all taking place sort of simultaneously. So just to give you a little sense of a time frame, we did begin with some of these steps as early as 2 years ago, and we're just now ready to start slowly rolling out a limited service in the fall. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce. Really interesting to hear about this kind of structured approach that you've taken. We are doing nicely on time. I do want to remind people that some of our presenters are kindly answering questions in the Q&A. So if you put a question in there, do check back. You might see an answer waiting for you. But let's go ahead and move on to our first of the 15-minute presentations. And again, we'll take all the rest of the questions at the end. This will be Rachel Hendricks, Hannah Craven, and Julie Stumpf. They will be presenting on Get Credit for Your Searches, Our Experience Using Search Archive.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So thank you for coming to our presentation on Search Archive. My name is Rachel Hendricks, and with me today are my colleagues Hannah Craven and Julia Stumpf. I'm at the University Library, and they're at the Ruth Lilly Medical Library on the Indiana University Indianapolis campus. So today we're going to cover what Search Archive is and how it works. the advantages to using Search Archive, along with the challenges we've experienced and some workarounds for those. And lastly, we'll briefly cover the differences between using Search Archive and an institutional repository for archiving your searches. Okay, so Search Archive is an open access repository for search strategies developed by CABI Digital Library, which is the same group that develops the database Global Health. This repository enables searches to be shared freely and openly, reused by others, and preserved for the long term. And it's available here at searcharchive.org. So here's how it works. Each database search is one record in Search Archive and will be assigned its own DOI. To submit a search, just like this little video shows, you just click Submit a Search at the top of the homepage and fill out a very, very long form. So you would fill out this form for each database search that you did in a systematic review. So if you search 3 databases, you would fill out the form 3 times for each database. Once the records have been approved, your searches will be discoverable via the Search Archive platform, and it'll also eventually show up in your ORCID profile when the DOI is harvested by Crossref. Each search strategy will also have a Creative Commons license assigned to it, either a CC0 or CC BY. So one of the reasons we started using Search Archive was after a failed attempt at locating an appendix with search strategies for a really old systematic review. So we started seeking better options to preserve our searches. And at the Medical Library Association meeting in 2022, we saw Melissa Ruthelson's presentation on developing Search Archive, an international transdisciplinary repository for search strategies. So we're like, okay, let's try this out. So a few months later, we started scheduling regular upload meetings. So since that point, the 3 of us have uploaded 65 searches total from 15 evidence syntheses. And we're pretty sure we're one of the heaviest users of this platform. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages to using Search Archive. A big one is that you can get credit for your search strategy work beyond the review that it was designed for. Because each search strategy gets its own DOI, it is a separate research product from the evidence synthesis that it contributed to. So this means you can add your searches to your CV and to your online profiles. Your searches can also accumulate citations and views. And this is something the Search Archive platform does. So for this search here, this one's been viewed 65 times and cited twice. It also enables reuse of your search, whether people want to directly use it or modify it, and you give them the ability to do that with the Creative Commons license. And all of this work can be done even if the review that you worked on never ends up getting published, which I saw some people in the keynote chat mention this, but the zombie review issue. So even if you did the work and it wasn't going to get published, you can still put those strategies into Search Archive. Another advantage is that you can contribute to the reproducibility of searches. So the fields in the form that you fill out align with the Prisma search criteria. So all the necessary information will be there for reproducing that search. The search strategies will also be preserved long-term, even if the appendix of the review that they were designed for disappears. And lastly, you can add the DOIs of your search strategies to the evidence synthesis manuscript, either through a citation or through a link. So that way, any of the readers of that review would be able to quickly and easily access your search strategy. Okay, now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Julia.
Hi. So there are some challenges we have found while using Search Archive, and we want to share those as well as the solutions and workarounds we have devised. Next slide, please. a few challenges that have arisen around the lack of documentation or help files in Search Archive we've seen. So while there is a submission guidelines section, it is not thorough and does not address the many questions we have had when entering information into the submission form. We also haven't found any guidance on how to name searches, which after we first added some searches, we realized the naming of them was more important than we had initially realized. Also, since we started using Search Archive, some fields have been renamed without explanation. Parent-child searches, which existed initially, no longer exist as a category. In their place seems to be related search, but there was no notification about this change before or after it happened from what we saw. And lastly, we find some fields on the submission form to be unclear. You will see this in the example below in these fields that are related to the database search. We're unclear the difference between year from, year to, and time span. So some of the solutions have been to send multiple emails to Search Archive staff to request clarification, discussion and formalizing among ourselves what is put in each field during those working meetings, and then lastly, documenting our decisions on templates and in local help files. Next slide, please. Each search has a DOI that can be linked to the record and/or the searches can be cited in an evidence synthesis manuscript. So submitting searches to Search Archive and adding links or citations to those searches in an article before an article is submitted to a journal can result in potentially unblinded peer review because they can link back to the names in Search Archive records. So by clicking on this link or seeing the citation, the reviewer can see the name of the search, author, institution, etc. Our workaround is to only put links to searches within the text of the article after the article has been accepted for publication. Next slide. Another challenge we have found with the Search Archive is finding the time to upload our searches. Currently, there are 40 fields on the submission form. To address this, we have scheduled meetings to collectively upload searches, setting aside time for this work. And I will let Hannah take it from here.
All right, thank you. So, depositing several related searches, in my opinion, as a neurodivergent person specifically, is tedious. So, in the online form, there's an option to attach related searches to your submission. And I found myself adding Word documents with all the metadata from the form, 40 fields in the form, and additional documents. So I wanted to streamline this process. And through open communication with Search Archive support team, they shared with us that the output of their online form to them is a spreadsheet. So I asked, could I see that? And would it be easier for me to send my searches that way just through email? So that's working really well. Each line, each row on my spreadsheet is a search from a different database, but they are all related. So the same evidence synthesis project. And this is working really well for us. I would not recommend this for your very first upload, but if you plan on being a Search Archive super user like we are, it's pretty slick. Next slide. So next, I would like to talk about curating your online scholarly presence in terms of the Search Archive products. So the challenge here is that these searches are not a typical research product, and it takes a little bit of curation to make them understandable in these different places we use them. So I'll touch on ORCID and CV in more depth, but Google Scholar, I feel like a year or two ago, they were appearing in Google Scholar, but now they're only appearing in our Google Scholar profiles if like this weird third-party website like duplicates our abstract and then it gets picked up. We've been in contact with them about that. I don't use ResearchGate, but I checked with Julia on her profile and it just pulled in her Search Archive items as article. We didn't explore too much after that. I will now discuss ORCID. We can merge our records for a streamlined look, and I'll discuss the CV. So this is what the default population of the records will look like on your ORCID profile. Thank you, Cecilia, for letting me screenshot this. And this is what it looks like pulled straight with the Crossref integration. And there's nothing wrong with this option. It's presenting it as it is. You can see Cecilia did a great job following our our arbitrary but decided upon title naming convention. And the only issue I see here is that ORCID and Crossref have deemed this item as a journal article, but really there's no other issue with this. Next slide. So some of us, and Cecilia will probably go and merge hers as well. Some of us have chosen to merge all of the records into one item on our ORCID profiles. So this is an example from mine. I did want to change the type of work this was, and I landed on other. It's not quite a preprint, it's not quite data. I can change this at any time, so it doesn't matter. And if you click on the hyperlink next to the preferred source of 4, next slide, it looks like this. So you can see all of the original record sources are from Crossref with the original titles. I deleted the database names in parentheses from my merged records since all of them are displayed as DOIs anyway under the original title. And the reason I choose to do this is to have a more streamlined appearance on my ORCID, and because I view these related searches as one product, because they were all for one evidence syntheses. And again, this is personal preference, and this is one of the things we work on during our working meetings. Sometimes we're uploading, sometimes we're curating our presence online. Next slide. This preference is again reflected in my CV. So I created a new section under non-refereed, and I titled it Systematic Searches. Again, this is kind of, no one said this was wrong or anything. So since Search Archive is similar to a preprint server, this made the most sense to me. And I grouped them each by the evidence syntheses projects, therefore. Next slide. So there were some questions in the chat or in the Q&A, so I hope this answers some of them, but we've gone back and forth on whether or not we want to add our searches to our institutional repository as well. And there are pros and cons to each, and unless you have administrative rights to your institutional repository, which I do, the level of control that you have over the record is the same. So you would need to email someone if you needed to make changes, which Search Archive is very responsive and they do make changes, so that's good. So some pros of the institutional repository is, in our opinion, you could have all your searches appear in one record with one permanent link, which would really simplify things. Our institutional repository is also picked up by Google Scholar, which would appear nicely on our Google Scholar profile. Next. Some pros of Search Archive, as we've discussed, this was curated specifically for exhaustive searches, and they have those robust metadata fields, making sure we include all the important information for Prisma S to make it more reproducible. Click. And then a con of the institutional repository, it's of course multi-purpose and not curated specifically for the searches. So I would still be leaning on all the metadata fields that Search Archive prompts me with, or I'd have to go check Prisma S to make sure I had all the information. And the last one, some cons of Search Archive we've kind of already touched on, but the related searches are all individual records, whether that might just be our opinion. And at this time, it's not picked up by Google Scholar. All right, that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Hannah. So in conclusion, we think Search Archive is a great way to get credit for your searches and to improve reuse and reproducibility of evidence synthesis projects. It definitely isn't perfect, but we have found the staff to be really responsive, helpful, and open to feedback. For now, we'll continue using Search Archive and encourage you all to as well. And yeah, thanks for coming. And you can download our slides here, or it's also in the resources.
Great, thank you all for this. It's been on my to-do list for probably years to start archiving my searches somewhere, and I have looked at Search Archive, and I love your idea of having like a regular meeting with your team to do that. That's a great idea. I think you will implement. We have some time. Let's go ahead and take a couple of questions that have come in for your presentation. You did address, Hannah, the sort of the pros cons of the institutional repository, but there was a question about linking across the two. Is there an easy way that you found to kind of either deposit in one or the other and just link as opposed to?
Right. So if I were to do it here, knowing what I know about our institutional repository and Search Archive, I would put it in Search Archive first. And then in our repository, I would put well, I don't know if I could put more than one DOI now that I think about it. Because usually when I'm putting like a post print, it'll be like, I'll put the DOI to the paywalled article. So if I was doing this, like I envision putting all my searches as one item in the repository, and I don't know if I could add multiple DOIs to link back to Search Archive. In terms of Search Archive, you can link to the DOI of like the article that resulted from this search. But I've never tried like cross-linking to other repositories. So that's interesting question that we could ask Search Archive support.
Yeah, great, thank you. One more quick question I think we have time for. How are your researchers, do they feel okay about you posting or making public search strategies, say before the publication is published, or any concerns about the timing of when you make your deposits?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, so we've only deposited ones after the publication's been published, so there wasn't any issues, and when I've asked them, they haven't been concerned. We have been talking about, the issue with the blind peer review, so we wouldn't likely deposit before it's been submitted. Likely it would happen when it's been accepted, but it's still going through copy editing, and you can make small changes like adding links to Search Archive at that point.
Rachel, someone in chat, I'm not done reading through chat, said that you can use OSF to share search terms and share it with an anonymous link. So I thought that was cool. I have put 2 things up that are before, but it's like, they were aware of it. The PI was aware of it. It was an example of, I was mentoring medical students, which like is a whole thing. Like I don't recommend working with medical students on a search unless it's very well done, but I was working with them and like mentoring them through that. And so, and they're 4th years now. So in order for this to be on their CV before they turn in their residency application, this will now be an item on their ERAS or whatever they call it. And because that systematic review will probably not be done by mid-September. So at least this will happen for them. And that is kind of like a pilot thing. But everyone was well aware and okay with it. I think Rachel has also gone to a webinar I couldn't attend, but they said like people do not get scooped from Search Archive searches because only librarians care about it. So
Great, thanks Hannah, thanks Rachel, and thank you Julia. These were great, great presentation. Let's go ahead and move on to our last presentation of the session. This is Mary Lou Clem and Renee Barger. They'll be presenting All or Nothing: Why We Do Not Offer Systematic Review Consultations.
Okay, let me just hang on a second here. You able to see my screen?
Yeah, I could see your screen, just the browser window.
Okay, why am I not? Okay, let's try that. That probably works better. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Renee was unfortunately not able to come today. So I'm going to be on my own in terms of fielding the chat and things like that. So I might be a little bit slower in answering questions. But I want to start by giving you some context. We're at the University of Pittsburgh, and our library system supports 6 schools of the health sciences here at Pitt, and we also provide resources and services to medical residents and fellows who are affiliated with a large nonprofit healthcare system that's headquartered here in Pittsburgh. And our systematic review program, which has been around for a while, is based on what we call our 2 core beliefs. And number 1 is that we think that expert level knowledge is required to build the comprehensive literature searches that are used for all types of evidence syntheses. And this belief has just been reinforced for us over the years by experience. In the past, we've attempted to provide consultations to patrons who wanted to build their own searches. And the librarians providing those consultations have uniformly agreed that no patron they worked with had ever left one of these consults capable of constructing the comprehensive searches that are required for these sorts of projects. Our second core belief is that evidence syntheses are complex research projects that should follow as best as they can well-known best practices and standards for their design, conduct, and reporting. And we're aware of the fact that we're not going to meet all of those standards. That would be probably impossible for anybody, but that's not a reason to ignore the ones that we can potentially meet, including standards that call for having a librarian or another information professional develop the literature searches. And so based on those core beliefs, we do provide a lot of assistance for systematic reviews and other types of evidence syntheses. And I want to explain the process real quickly that we use. First of all, as I've mentioned in some of the earlier talks today, we do require a protocol, and we provide a lot of support for development of that protocol by a patron in the form of accessible template forms that they can use, as well as rather exhaustive instructions and guidance that we provide to them. The next thing that happens is once the protocol is submitted, it undergoes scientific review. And it is a formal scientific review by our librarians. And the intent behind this review is to strengthen and clarify the content of the protocol. So the reviews are done, as I said, by our librarians, our experienced librarians, and several of us have expertise in research methods and critical appraisal. And then once reviewers approve a protocol, and actually I should say if they do, because we are allowed to decline to accept a protocol, we then have a project librarian who's going to volunteer to work with the group, and they will be the one who is responsible for conceptualizing, creating, and documenting the search strategies. And as a co-author on the publication or any publications that arise from the review project, they will assist in manuscript preparation. So we have a quite extensive level of support that we provide. In addition to that, we also license Distiller SR, and we have 2 librarians who are Distiller librarians who provide support for a team if they want to use the Distiller software during the review process. So that's the all, and what comes next is the nothing. And what do we mean by we don't offer systematic review consultations? Okay, and it's actually pretty simple. If a patron comes to us and asks us to teach them how to build searches or to review or give feedback or suggestions about searches they are currently building or have already built, we will actually decline to do that. We will decline to schedule a consultation with them. Instead, what we do is we let them know about our systematic review program if they're not aware of it. If they are aware of it, we still tell them we don't provide this type of consultation. We want you to go through our review program. And if they decline to go to our program and to go through that process I outlined for you earlier, we will continue to decline to work with them. And I want to emphasize that any point where we're declining this sort of a request, what we also do is we try to provide a fairly detailed explanation of why we're turning them down. And so what you're seeing here now on the screen in front of you is the sort of a typical explanation. It's actually a script that we provide to our librarians, and we have several of those. They're all pretty similar, that librarians are free to use when they're declining to do an SR consult. And regardless of kind of the format in which we're making the explanation or who is making the explanation, there are similar points that we're always going to try to make. And so I don't want to read the script to you, I just want to hit these points. And number one is to emphasize that we have tried to provide these sorts of consultations in the past, but as I mentioned earlier, consistently found that the librarian wasn't confident that the patron left the consult knowing what they were due. And the consequence a lot of times is that the librarian then felt obligated to take over because the patron was struggling to understand what they were being taught. And that meant that our librarians, who at that time were already being overloaded with SR requests, already wound up taking an additional one that they had not planned for. And those sorts of experiences have reinforced for us the fact that the knowledge and skills that are required for these development of these sorts of searches cannot be acquired through short or informal learning. It's a long process. And so therefore, if the patron really wants to do comprehensive searches for their review, the best path for getting those is going to be to work with our systematic review program. We can guarantee the outcome is going to be a comprehensive, high quality search. Our librarians wholeheartedly support this and endorse this policy. They love it. They do occasionally feel uncomfortable when they're enforcing it. And I think that that's certainly understandable because it can be, particularly as a librarian, I think, really hard to turn down someone who is coming to you looking for a service. And so the script that I mentioned is extremely helpful. The librarians love it. They swap around different versions of it that they've used. In addition to that, we like to think that we support our librarians by making it very clear that support for this policy comes from the very top. Renee Barger, who is my co-author on this presentation, is our Associate Vice Chancellor and wholeheartedly has endorsed it. Everybody's aware of that. And she actually was one of the people who developed the process. And so we know, the librarians know that we've got their back. And then secondly, we always do provide backup for our librarians so that if they have concerns, they're still not comfortable, even if they have a script, or if they're getting some sort of pushback from a patron that they're not comfortable dealing with, then they all know that either I or their immediate supervisor can join the conversation at any level and in any way that they would want in order to make them comfortable enforcing this policy with our patrons. And so that, in a nutshell, is our all or nothing policy. But I do want to end by just throwing out a couple of additional thoughts, because as we've implemented this policy, we continue to talk about it, talk about patrons' reactions to it and whatnot. We've also developed some additional concerns or larger thoughts about consults. And I want to share those, not to tell anybody you're doing anything wrong, but just to, in the spirit of encouraging further discussion, right? Number one of my big concerns is that consultations might be undermining our own expertise, right? Because by offering them, we're suggesting that the patrons might be becoming expert searchers. And I think honestly, most of us know that's not true. But I would argue that they're not even becoming good enough after this level of training. We just don't have the ability to train them to the point where they can be doing even good enough searches. And so we're kind of telling them, it's easy, you can do it. Here, I taught you how to do it in an hour or two. And the reality is it takes a lot longer than that to be trained, and it certainly takes a lot longer than they're probably taking to develop these searches. So we might actually be undermining a very valuable and unique expertise that we have. And another concern for us, and this is a particular one for us because we do operate in an environment where almost all the students and faculty who want to do these sorts of reviews are looking to publish, is the scientific impact of this kind of consultation. We know that poorly constructed searches can have significant impact on the results of a review, right? If you do a poor review, do a poor search, it's likely that you're going to miss relevant literature. And if you miss relevant literature, you're potentially introducing bias into the evidence synthesis. And so the validity of its findings might be undermined. And so that's a particular concern to us, like I said, and something that we continue to think about. So again, I'm not telling people how to do things. I'm just throwing out some larger concerns in the hopes of folks taking these points home and thinking about them. You can decide that, I don't know what I'm talking about. You can maybe not take them seriously. And I'm also always happy to have a further discussion with folks about it. But otherwise, that's my talk, and thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary Lou. Super interesting approach, and I'm sure this resonates with many, many people in the room. And we have a good number of questions for you as well. So let's take a few of those. First question is about potential, I don't know if you addressed this, but potential sort of, I don't know if it's backlash or pushback from the departments or faculty, not so much in the library, but the departments that are being served through the health sciences library.
Yeah, not so much. I mean, we will have people kind of push us when we make this, but we have not had any sort of formal pushback from the departments per se. And we don't actually get a huge number of requests for these sorts of consultations, because I think we've done a pretty good job over the years of convincing people that they need to go through our SR program. So it's at most, it's kind of like, I'm disappointed, I really wanted to use you, but we need to get this done in the next 2 weeks. And so, you know, if you won't do a consult, we'll do it on our own. And I'm fine with that. We're fine with that.
There's actually a couple questions about support for student-led projects. I'm wondering if you support those in any way, or if you're involved in classes that are using this kind of method.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, we do have, for example, School of Public Health has students who almost do what's called a comprehensive review for their master's thesis. And we used to get a lot of those folks coming through, but our liaisons, our current liaison and the prior liaison to public health actually have done a wonderful job of working with faculty over there so that they have sort of their own approach to working with students and providing consultations for these reviews, with the understanding these are not going to be adequate. The searches the students develop are not adequate for a publishable review, but it's going to be good enough and fairly comprehensive for their thesis. And so that's worked out well. With students who are proposing to do a systematic or scoping review as part of like a dissertation, again, usually what they're saying is they want to publish it. And so we insist that they go through the SR program. Yeah. And again, that's something they seem okay with. For the most part, we don't get a lot of consultations for them. They usually just come directly to our SR program to ask for that level of help.
Great, thanks. Lots more questions here for Mary Lou. We'll keep going on these. I think most of our other presenters have answered questions thoroughly in the Q&A. Seeing an interesting question here about whether or not sort of like, I guess, how upfront this kind of model is for your patrons. So Olga is asking if the script is shared right off the bat from the service, or you know, does this sort of get more into the detailed consult, you know, when you're sort of initially?
Yeah. Well, usually, I guess that the way that these requests typically come in for a consult is through our regular Ask a Librarian service. So it's an email sent to the reference desk. And once we've determined that's what they're asking for, they immediately get the script, right? It's like we won't schedule a consult with them. It's just like, we can figure, most of us are good at parsing out from that email and kind of back and forth thing. Is this for a systematic review or a scoping review? And if they say, yes, I just need help with keywords, it's like, look, I hate to tell you this, but we don't do it. So it is upfront. We're not actually even going to get to the point where we'd sit down with them unless there was something going on during the initial contact via email where we couldn't figure out for sure what they were asking. And then we'd bring them in to have a full-fledged talk and maybe bring it up. But it's usually done with that initial contact through the Ask a Librarian.
Great, thanks, Mary Lou. I think you've actually addressed a number of these other questions. So I think we'll go ahead and maybe wrap up the session there. We had some wonderful presentations.
Yeah, can I actually address one? It's
absolutely.
someone that's because this is a good question. I'll be quick about it. The question is, do you have concerns in cases where you decline to consult that the researchers are simply going forth with their projects and publishing without any guidance at all? I wouldn't trying to figure out how to phrase this. They could be, but my name's not on it and the library's name's not on it. And we figured they're doing stuff on their own anyway. There's probably hundreds of people out in our health sciences community publishing stuff without us on it anyway. And there's no way we can do everything for everybody. So if they don't want to take advantage of our expertise and publish their own review that has a very poor quality search, that reflects on them. And I'm not going to worry about it, except to the extent that I worry about there being a lot of garbage out there in general in the science. But I don't stay awake nights thinking about the SRs that we're not on, for what it's worth.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Lou. Thank you for calling out that question. I think I'm getting a little lost with as many questions as we've had come in, but that was a really good one. All right. Appreciate everyone. We are going to be capturing sort of snapshots of these questions. So there may be other ways that we can have our presenters post-event address these, and feel free to reach out to folks as well. So very much appreciate everyone's presence here. So much great engagement in the Q&A, but also in the chat. Cosette, Janessa, maybe I'll leave a few minutes for you to say any wrap-up words if you'd like to for day one here.
Well, we did it, everyone. Day one is down. This has been a blast, and we hope you'll tune in tomorrow for day two. Same time, same place. We are going to stick around for a little while. Chat has been great, but we'll also be available via email. We've had questions come through the lobby chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And thank you for sending in so many great resources and suggestions to make this even better. Am I forgetting anything, Cosette? I always am.
Well, I was just going to go ahead and thank all of our day one presenters, as you said, Janessa, and all of our day one attendees. I mean, this has just been so rewarding so far, and we're really looking forward to day two. Right.
Well,
we'll be
recordings
sticking around.
are going to be available as Zoom processing. They're magically appearing. And so if we need to go back and revisit things, we'll have this available for at least a year. So this knowledge won't be lost. See you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
All right, Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and start saving the chat and the other material, and I'll let you know when we're ready.
Okay, should I stop the recording or just let it go until?
You could stop.